Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Newcastle podcast. And once again, we're back talking about Newcastle United. But before we get into that, my name is Michael Grameslow and I'm joined by one of our finest. Iain, how's it going, Iain?
One of our finest. That is picking me as just sort of near the front in a group in a group that includes Kev, Joanne, and Nicola. Not even at the front of that group. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I was doing great until you popped my balloon there. No, I'm doing fine. I'm only joking. Kevin, Joanne, and Nicola are lovely.
Yeah, and send them some love on social media because from what I've seen, they don't seem to get any. So be nice. That's a demand. But I'll move on to Newcastle United. Now, the international break arguably came at the worst possible time for Newcastle after big wins against Arsenal, Chelsea, and Nottingham Forest, but wins against those three. We've come to expect that from Newcastle United and Eddie Howe, but our players undoubtedly took their form into the break with Sandro Tonali and Anthony Gordon getting their first goals for their international teams, Tino and Livramento playing absolutely beautifully for England, and not to mention Alexander Isak got a goal and assist for Sweden. There were 11 other players in action as well, but they weren't quite as good, so we'll not talk about that. But the big discussion, and the big question maybe for Newcastle is whether that momentum that we have will be halted ahead of Monday's fixture against West Ham United. What do you think, Iain? Do you think we've had enough time to, sort of keep our form? We know exactly what's going on. We haven't had too much of a break that internationals are going to disrupt anything? Or do you think maybe it'll have a little bit of a teething period in the first half?
No, I'm going to take it all very, very positively, I think. Thanks, by the way, for asking me my first disc question. I've never had one of them before. I would say, I think it's great news that Eddie took a lot of the first team squad away to Saudi Arabia for some warm weather training, because we always seem to really kick on when we've done that, when we come back from that. And yeah, the international break is a pain. The guys have been missing, but they must be back by now, so they've got a full week's training before we play West Ham, including 2 extra days rest, because we don't play West Ham till Monday night. So, factor in the fact that Callum Wilson and Kieran Trippier may well be fit and available for selection as well. I think, I get what you mean. We were on a roll, and it would have been nice to keep going with that roll, but I don't think it should interrupt with us too much. The guys have been away bonding, and then they've had a full week's training before West Ham. We should be up to speed. Yeah,
100%. I always say that I think international breaks really hinder Newcastle United. And to be honest, I mention it because I've said it before on the podcast. And when I actually looked into it ahead of today's pod, turns out I'm wrong. Which, it doesn't happen a lot. It's fine. Only like every podcast. But except from the 1-0 home defeat to Brighton, our last 6 games, we've won them all. So we had the 2-1 win away from Wolves. Ultimately, we weren't fantastic. 2 brilliant goals got us the win. The 4-3 home win against West Ham, which, absolutely fantastic game. 4-1 win against Chelsea. 4-0 home win against Crystal Palace. And the 1-0 home win against Brentford, which arguably started our season last year. So, Brighton aside, and that's a game where we played exceptionally well and just didn't really get the look of the draw, let's say. We actually haven't suffered a lull after international breaks. And with that in mind, we've seen 4 goals in 3 of the last 6 games after the international break. And to be honest, I think you actually might be spot on with warm weather training in Saudi, in line with some of those where we've got the 4. Could we expect to see another goal fest, maybe against West Ham?
Well, I'd certainly hope so. I hope it's a more relaxed goal fest to sit back and enjoy, rather than coming back from 3-1 down in the last 20 minutes like we did last year, although that ultimately was a fantastic match to be at. It didn't feel fantastic when they went 3-1 up, I have to admit. But I think West Ham are in pretty ropey form, aren't they? I mean, I do like a lot of players in their squad. I think it looked like they strengthened during the summer, but they just don't seem to have the system that we were half talking about before we went on air, Michael. And I think this is a case in point where football fans should be warned to be careful what they wish for, because I think they may well have jettisoned a very good, experienced Premier League manager in falling out with David Moyes and getting Lopetegui in, who he's a bit iffy, his record, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not great.
And he was at Wolves and then gave up. He was somewhere, wasn't he? Briefly.
So he was at Wolves most recently, but he's had spells at Spain, Real Madrid, Sevilla. So you'd think he'd come to the Premier League and hit the ground running, but Wolves, dreadful. West Ham, it looks even worse.
I think it's early days still. They're only 10, 12 games in, aren't they? So,
true.
And he's got to get to know his squad. But, I mean, certainly the first hour when we played them last year, you could see the damage that Bowen, Kudus and Antonio can do when they play together. I mean, they hit us so many times. I'm hoping we've got a little bit of extra nip in the defensive legs than we had when we played them. Certainly Tino and Lewis Hall ought to be able to get back to cover those wingers a little bit better than Emil Kraft came on to replace Lewis Hall and then got subbed off because he was so awful during that match. I'm very hopeful for the match against West Ham.
I agree.
I think I've got tickets for it.
You think?
I think. I never get my own tickets. I'm always relying on Joanne to be able to work her magic when they go on general sale. She's done it twice again today for us. So I think I've got West Ham tickets. I haven't. It's on the telly, isn't it?
Yes, it will be Monday Night Football. But yeah, bless Joanne's soul. Lovely. But on the topic of sort of our game against the Hammers, I think it will be a fantastic game. And considering we've put 11 goals past them in the last 3 games, including the 5-1 where Alexander Isak also cheekily chipped that ball into the back of the net after a howler from Lucas Fabianski. I don't think they'll be so giving this time around at St. James's. And we have, to put a slight dampener on, we have struggled at some points this season to score when we're on top. So West Ham might cause a different challenge. We know they're going to sit back. The games against Arsenal and Chelsea, they favoured us, but Nottingham Forest also did that, sat back, and we saw a completely different Newcastle United. So I'm going to stick with the opinion that I think we're going to hit the ground running, and I think we're going to do very, very well against West Ham. But I do think it's going to come down, how we do in the game is going to come down to not just one player, but how well someone does filling in for Dan Burn, who will be suspended for the game on Monday. Have you seen enough of Lloyd Kelly to say that you're comfortable with him in Burn's place?
It is a shame that he's got suspended and we have to disrupt that team. However, when we played Chelsea in the Cup, Kelly took over at centre-half from Dan Burn and played very, very well.
True.
2 or 3 incredible blocks, last-ditch tackles that snuffed out any danger, where in the crowd you're anticipating that, oh, damn, they're back in it. So I'm confident in Lloyd Kelly's ability to be able to step in, particularly against West Ham. We're not talking about an Arsenal or a Liverpool here. And he's had an extra, given that he's a fairly new arrival, he's had his first week away with the boys to do the bonding and the training. So, yeah, Lloyd Kelly will be fine. He will be fine.
Yeah, absolutely hope so. And speaking of absolutely fine, we're going to go into our first advert of the podcast, which is brought to us by Iain, and it's about Zencastr.
Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Global Sports Podcast Network. Zencastr makes it easy to start a high-quality podcast built for growth from day one. with 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns, Zencastr makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr.
And we are back. Absolutely fantastic. Now, a lot of the time, we go into games against Premier League standard opposition, and I have a slight doubt of how Newcastle United will play, if we'll perform well. But to be honest, from what I've seen from West Ham this season, I woke up this morning and I felt incredibly positive, to the point where I actually had to go and check to see if I was maybe ill or something like that. But when I actually looked at the stats of West Ham this season, to be honest, well, I'll just pluck a few out. So, West Ham have played more long balls than any other side in away games this season, with an average of 60 per game. Only Man United, Southampton and Crystal Palace have scored less goals from open play on the road, and they have the lowest possession stat, or one of the lowest possession stats in the league this season. Despite that, Man City are the only team with more dribbles in 90 minutes than West Ham. So, to summarise that, because that's a lot of information, they're going to defend in numbers, they're going to double up on our wingers, send a long ball forward, Antonio's going to try and hold it up, knock it to a Paqueta, a Bowen, a Kudus, and they'll try and progress up the field that way. Now, that's how West Ham play. They could get very good at it. It's not that different from what we saw with Moyes, but Moyes was getting much better results. But if that is how they play, Ian, are you confident that we'll be able to handle that?
I think Newcastle's confidence will be sky high after these last three games. I think Tino, Lewis Hall, Anthony Gordon will all come back from their international break with their tails up. Similarly for Isak. Even Miggy will come back into the squad with his Paraguay having beaten Argentina, I think.
Argentina, yeah.
So I think the confidence will be really high. I don't think it'll matter how West Ham try to play against us, because I think we will start super fast, and I don't think they've got enough to deal with a confident front three fed by Bruno to hold out even for the first 15 minutes. So I can see an early goal, maybe a second, and then maybe we'll lay off a little bit, but I just think we'll be on top and we'll get ahead early. That's how I see it. That'll draw them out. They won't be able to play like that. They'll have to come out, and then we may well then revert to our standing off ourselves and hitting them on the counter. Yeah. I can see another goal fest, as you suspected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a fantastic thing for the game on Monday, because typically we don't look forward to games on Mondays. Eddie Howe has changed that, thankfully, which is something I'll actually go into a little bit later. Spoiler. But discussing their style of play and their game plan, I actually wanted to touch on something a bit more what you've just mentioned, and how Newcastle United are very much looking to excite going into this game. Very different pace compared to what I'm usually used to. We're all very positive. But going into the game, West Ham have only kept 2 clean sheets in 28 away games, which means if they keep a clean sheet against us, there's something we've done seriously wrong. They've also conceded 66 goals in the time, so that's, I think, 2.5 a game, something like that. More than any other top flight side. So if we can put 8 past Sheffield United, why can't we put 10 past West Ham? That's a bit silly, don't worry. Well, we're not going to do that, but maybe 3 or 4. But Alexander Isak also has more goals against West Ham than any other side in his career. And he's only played against them 3 times. So would we say that Alexander Isak could be, you said we're going to start early. Alexander Isak may be a good choice for that first goal scorer, I bet.
He's always a good choice for first goal scorer, I bet. However, he's always rubbish odds for first goal scorer.
That's true.
If you want to bet something at 5-2, go and pick a horse. Because you can get the horse that's not in a 22 runner field.
Yes.
Yeah, I would far rather. What I do on my goal scorer bets, by the way, is pick somebody at about 10, 12 to 1. One of the centre halves usually. You can get that price to score at any time during the game. And I've had 3 wins on Dan Burn. I've had 3 wins on Fabian Schär. And when you've got a good working man's price like 12 to 1, they don't have to come. They don't have to come in all of the time. You can end up well up, just isolating that goal scorer bet. So there's a little tip for all the gamblers out there. Leave the favourites to score first. Leave that for somebody else to bet on, and try and take advantage of somebody less likely. Maybe Lewis Hall is due another one. Might get 14 to 1 for him. Had to score any time during the game. Certainly a good chance if there's a 6 or 7 going in.
No, absolutely. I think, well, I've just said we're going to score 10. I mean, I might have been joking, but Lewis Hall definitely gets one if we go that far. But you've heard it here. The working man's bet, 10 to 1 plus. Don't go for that Tory 5 to 2. But we'll not talk politics on this podcast, because I'd probably get in a lot of trouble, and I think everyone would who doesn't on Twitter and stuff these days, to be honest. But we've spoke about a goal fest, and we've spoken about the potential that Newcastle have in unlocking that West Ham defence as they're going to sit back, they're going to double up. So in the next part, we'll go into a little bit more maybe on who we'd bring in to maximise our attacking flavour. But for now, we're going to go to our second advert of the podcast. And once again, it's going to be delivered to us by Iain. And this one is going to be about the Global Sports Podcast Network.
I think, by the way, this may well also not be the right Global Sports Podcast Network advert, because I know the Zencastr one is the wrong one, but hey, the message is the same. This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
Absolutely smashing. The Global Sports Podcast Network sounds fantastic. You'd already know that, though, because that's what you're listening to. Now, we've mentioned a little bit about the Newcastle defence, a little bit about West Ham, and we're not all that impressed on how they've been this season. But I wanted to ask you about our lineup and how we should approach the game. As you mentioned in part 2, it shouldn't really matter how West Ham show up, how they play, if we are in full gear. In our last 3 games, we've played Joe as a winger. He's rotated against Nottingham Forest, played a little bit more on the right. To be honest, I thought we played better when that happened. But Joe Linton and Gordon on the wings, with Willock in central midfield alongside Bruno and Longstaff. And boy, has it worked a treat. But would you keep it the same on Monday? Or would you be tempted to change things?
I would keep it the same. I think Eddie will keep it the same. Bar Kelly coming in for Dan Burn. But if we can get a couple of goals ahead, I wouldn't be slow in mixing it up a little bit. I think there are a number of our first team squad who deserve a little bit longer on the pitch. Tonali, for example.
Yeah.
Harvey Barnes. Maybe even Jacob Murphy stroke Miggy Almiron. Haven't really played for Newcastle in the last month. So the thing is they've got to have some skin in the game to feel as good as the rest of the squad, I think. And therefore you need to bring them in. I would be delighted to see either or Kieran Trippier and Callum Wilson on the bench as well. Let's see if they can come on and get 20 minutes. They've both been out for too long. And whilst we certainly don't look like we're suffering for not having them in the last few games, it's got to be a plus if they are available.
You can never have too much depth.
I well remember the Isaac Wilson swapping over system from a year and a half ago, which was really effective. They've both got a hatful of goals against West Ham, curiously enough. Not all of them against West Ham, but I think they both scored in that match where we won 5-1, didn't they?
Yeah, they've both got excellent records against West Ham, and I'm not sure if that's a sign of maybe West Ham weren't as good under David Moyes as we thought, although they won a trophy, so they were clearly quite good, or it's just a fact of the two styles their style complements ours so much better because we have that high pressing, attacking with pace, and they just simply can't handle it. And let's be honest, Callum Wilson, if you give him a chance, he knows where the net is. So having him back would be fantastic. But I do want to focus on Harvey Barnes because, as you mentioned, the one negative maybe of us performing so well is the fact that we've got a £40 million man on the bench who isn't really getting game time, and there have been rumours of discontent in the papers before. I think it was the Arsenal game. I saw that Barnes wanted more game time, and he was our top goal scorer at the time. Now, he does have a fantastic record against West Ham, and it feels like everyone does, but he's got 8 goal involvements against them, 6 goals and 2 assists. So if there was a game to start Harvey Barnes, could this be it?
Well, you'd think you could do, couldn't you? You could start Harvey Barnes down the left. You could give Anthony Gordon a little bit of a rest, bring him on later on if needed, or just give him a day off. That's what rotation is. Pep plays some matches where Haaland never gets on the field because he doesn't think that they can play every game throughout the whole season. We're not in the same situation as those guys. We're not playing in Europe, so we don't quite have the workload that they're trying to
manage,
get around. But Harvey Barnes does need more game time for his own mental health, I think, apart from anything else. Because when he's played, I know he's a fabulous impact sub. When he's come on, he's done really well. They actually came on and almost completely changed the first hour against Fulham. He got us back to 2-1, didn't he? And could easily have set up the equaliser, which unfortunately we didn't get. So I think I don't know how you would do it. I don't think Eddie would start Harvey Barnes and leave somebody on the bench because he'd say every Premier League game is very difficult.
Yes.
And it's kind of treating West Ham like AFC Wimbledon in the Carabao Cup, where you leave a lot of your first choice team out and bring squad players in. And you cannot really do that. You cannot really do that
not at all.
For a Premier League team. So I just think maybe an earlier substitution if things are going well. Or if they're going terribly, you could make an earlier substitution. He's when things weren't going well, Eddie was more than happy to do 3 subs at half time on 1 or 2 of the games. So maybe there's scope for that if you are 2 up or 3 up, maybe he could do that.
Yeah, I think one of the tactical battles that's actually intriguing me is if we do start Joe Linton on that left-hand side. West Ham is their right back. They have Aaron Wan-Bissaka, widely regarded in the league as one of the best one-on-one players. So maybe that's an argument for not starting Harvey Barnes because you've got let's be honest, Barnes isn't the best dribbler. What he's good at is cutting inside, knocking it in the top corner. Anthony Gordon's a fantastic dribbler, so you'd probably want him on our right. Against Aaron Wan-Bissaka, his strength is not letting players past him. He's not going to have that strength if he's trying to win aerial duels against Joe for 60 minutes and he's getting knocked about. I was going to say like Mike Tyson, but, I don't think anyone wanted to watch that boxing match and it was pretty dreadful. So we'll say more like the female fight beforehand, Amanda Taylor and Serrano, which awful cutting that. But if one gets knocked about like that by Joe, he's not going to want to be running Barnes running at him in the second half where, he's battling bruised because Joe won 50 aerial duels against him in one game. So that's, for me, one of our tactical battles. But what do you think?
Well, I'm just going to ask a question because I don't remember seeing it very much at all, other than a quick switch and then back again during the game. But Harvey Barnes, I mean, he's 2-footed, isn't he? But he's got a very good right foot. He cuts in and puts them all in the top corner with his right foot. So is Harvey Barnes not another potential solution down the right wing?
Yeah, you'd think it was that way.
We've never tried that, have we?
I think we've played it for, I can't remember what game it was. It might have been Chelsea, where we played him for 15, 20 minutes on the other side, and I thought he looked pretty good, but you're completely right. It's been really sporadic this season, and I don't know if it's just Eddie's tried it in training, and he's just not had the same effects. Maybe on the right, he's struggled against Tino Livramento or even Kraft in training. And that's why we're looking at it and going, right, Barnes, you have to stay on that left side, because you have to admit, when on the left side, we're absolutely stacked. We've got some of the best players in the league over on that side. So if we can fix that right wing scenario without, having to spend 60 million, if Harvey Barnes can be the answer there, we could have one of the best attacking threes in the league without a shadow of a doubt. But the question is, I'm not sure I've seen enough from Harvey Barnes when starting games to say that he can do that. Because as you say, the impacts he makes off the bench are second to none. I don't think, maybe you're looking at Chicharito when he was at Manchester United, of more of an impact sub than Harvey Barnes. But to be honest, I can't think of any better.
David Fairclough for Liverpool, he was definitely a super sub. Little ginger fella. Fantastic coming on. But Barnes is 40 million quid. He's so much more than an impact sub. We've got to find 100%. A way to accommodate him somehow. I was thinking maybe it's a game as well where we might get to see Lewis Miley play more than his 2 or 3 minutes at the end, because he's had another 2 weeks of training. Let's have Lewis. Lewis Miley was away with England under 21.
England under 21s, yeah.
So yeah, why not? Let's have Lewis Miley come on for half an hour. Give Tonali a rest.
He looked fantastic during the Champions League season. If he can come on and even replicate that form off the bench, he could be one of the best Newcastle I'm not going to say ever had, because we've had some fantastic centre mids, but he's certainly going to be one of the better centre mids we've seen in a long time, alongside the likes of Bruno. But speaking of centre mids, Sandro Tonali's played 180 minutes for Italy. He doesn't seem to miss a minute for Italy. But do you think the fact that Italy keep giving them that 180 minutes, do you think that pretty much solidifies the fact that Sean Longstaff starts on Monday?
I think Sean Longstaff's got to start. I mean, I've heard repeatedly that it's Bruno, Longstaff, Willock and Joe starting together. Is it Joe starting together? Yep. And they've never been beaten. In fact, they've won every game bar one when those guys have started. They've got to start. They've got to start. But yeah, Tonali's another player who will not be happy, will not be comfortable settling into the impact sub role, which he's performed admirably in the last 2 or 3 games. But that's a different headache for Eddie to have, compared to this time last year, where he was wondering if he had 3 fit midfielders, trying to accommodate all of them and let them all feel that they're an exciting, vibrant part of this team rather than a bit player. That's a different challenge, but a challenge nevertheless that he's going to have to try and fix.
Yeah, 100%. I think you can get away with it if you're a Champions League team or maybe even Europa League team, but when you're not in Europe, players seem to get there's a little bit more discontent there, let's say. But the reason I mention the Champions League and the Europa League is because this morning, Opta have released their supercomputer predictions for the rest of the season, where we're going to finish. And I'm actually going to list the top 8 in a moment, but what I want to finish on is I'm going to ask you, Iain, if you agree, and I also want the listeners to add any changes that they would make, or if they completely agree with this top 8. So, start off, I'll name the teams and their positions, and we'll speak about them after all 8. But first place, Liverpool. Second place, Manchester City. Third, Arsenal. Fourth, Chelsea. Fifth, Newcastle United. Sixth, Brighton and Hove Albion. Seventh, Tottenham Hotspur. And eighth, Aston Villa. Now, Iain, would you agree with that? And, well, actually, would you be happy with fifth?
I think it'd be really close, and I think this is always the same. The supercomputer is only basing its predictions on the first 11 games of the season.
100%.
That's why Liverpool are up to win it. Now, this time last year, Tottenham had exactly the same record that Liverpool have got: won 9, drawn 1, lost 1, and where did they finish? 6th. So
just ahead of us. I think it was 5th.
5th, right. So There's a huge pinch of salt to be taken when people are trying to predict the next 27 games based on the first 11. It's crazy,
100%.
really. However, I can see why they've got Liverpool to win it. I don't think you can ever write Manchester City off, but hey, if they lose another 4 games in a row, that'll give everybody else a chance. I don't think Arsenal looked up to much when they came and played ours. I don't know why they're going to race away and hang on to third. I hear that today the Belgian Trossard has got injured as well, so that just adds to their injury woes.
Yeah.
Chelsea fourth, yeah. I could see us and Chelsea battling for third and fourth and fifth with Arsenal. And then what did you have? You had Brighton at sixth.
Brighton in sixth, Tottenham in seventh, and then Aston Villa in eighth.
Yeah, Villa already are struggling a little bit with their extra games, I think. So
they've got a lot of injuries, and it's come about 3-4 weeks before our injury crisis did, so it's not looking good for them.
Brighton sixth seems very high, but then they got absolutely walloped possession-wise, etc. at our place, but they won 1-0. I don't think it's far out, their predictions, to be fair, but I do think that you could end up looking stupid with that list without knowing the different points you've got between them.
Yeah,
I think
true.
This is the closest Premier League that I can, probably since Leicester won it.
Yeah.
And we will get through to April, and there will still be, nobody's going to run away with it. Because I think Liverpool are in a false position. They're definitely going to lose on December the 4th anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Liverpool are in a false position. I can't believe that their super dodgy midfield hasn't been exposed by somebody. But don't rate them much at all. Anyway, I'll get slagged off by all the Scousers now, won't I?
Maybe just a bit.
Yeah. So I think you could take maybe all of those 8, 9 you gave us and put 10 or 12 points between them at the end of the season. And when it's that close, you're mad to try and guess what order they're going to be in.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And there is one team that was missing from that, and I always love when this team is
it a
ready
team
to do
that plays in red?
Yes. In case people can't guess, Manchester United were predicted to finish. It might have been 9th, it might have been 10th, but either way, we weren't looking that further down the table because we'll be fighting for those Champions League places. That's all from me, and that's all from Iain. We've been the Daily Newcastle podcast, and we will see you next time.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.